anybody care that the pilot was in the audience? Did you care? Did my parents care? Did George care? Well, he wasn't there, but did anybody care? Did anybody care that stinking pilot was in the audience? And yet, of course, it freaked Jerry out. A simple but just silly little story that just made this another good episode. The Diplomats Club. It's, to me, out of the episodes on this disc, it's right there in the middle. Is one of my favorite. It's a good episode. I enjoy it. It's one that I would definitely go back and watch whenever I binge watch it. I wouldn't say it's one of the best, but it's a strong episode. I like the Diplomats Club episode. It's a pretty funny one. Of course, this does end a journey for Elaine. George, meanwhile, has to prove that he's not racist. And Kramer, unfortunately, gets hooked on one of his old addictions. Jerry, meanwhile, just wants to make it home to have a few hours with his girlfriend, who's a model, before she goes away for like a month doing whatever the heck she has to do. And they're going to be able to spend time together in some lounge at the airport. Not sure how it works, but he had 6 hours. Then it turned into 30 minutes. How do we get there, though? Let's talk about it. So, the episode starts off where Jerry is talking about how he's going to have a crazy day. He's going to be getting on a plane, going to Ithaca to do a show, come back, meet his girlfriend Bridget, who's a model getting ready to go away for about a month, and they're going to spend some time in the Diplomats Club lounge, which he'll have 6 hours, as long as he gets back on time. Kramer's going to go to the airport with him to hang out. George, meanwhile, though, it says there's like a change in staff at the Yankees. His new boss is now Mr. Morgan, who he feels like he hasn't really quite hit it off on good terms with yet. So he wanted to, take some photos, and he wants to get a photo and put a photo on his desk with him and Mr. Morgan, just to, kind of start a better bond between them, he thought them. Elaine, meanwhile, has had it with Mr. Pitt. She plans on storming his office and quitting. So, Elaine goes to Mr. Pitt's office, which is about to quit. Mr. Pitt mentions how he's working on his will, and he's putting Elaine in his will. To which Elaine's like, geez, I can't quit on him now. But then, of course, Mr. Pitt, though, has to go to the pharmacy to get some more medication. I guess he was on, heart medication or something like that. Jerry was there, meanwhile. I think he was there grabbing a few things for either his trip or his night with Bridget or whatever he was planning. Happens to run into Mr. Pitt. At this time, though, Jerry and Mr. Pitt, though, have never met. They don't know what each other look like. Since Jerry's all dressed up, Mr. Pitt mistakes him as someone who actually works at the pharmacy. When Mr. Pitt asks him for a certain medication, Jerry gives him a random medication he finds. But the thing, though, was it was not the right medication. It was too strong for Mr. Pitt's condition. Which, unfortunately, leads to a downhill as Elaine, wanted to quit at the end of the episode. She got out of it, but not the way she wanted to, unfortunately. Get back to that shortly. George, meanwhile, is having photos taken at his office. And he has one picture left on his camera, so he wants to get a picture with his boss, Mr. Morgan. Just kind of, make casual chit-chat. He says, has anybody ever told you look like Sugar Ray Leonard? And then Mr. Morgan says, well, I guess you think we all look alike, don't we? Implying that George only said that to Mr. Morgan because Mr. Morgan's black. And which George is trying to cover. No. It has nothing to do with that whatsoever, but nobody would listen to George. Everybody thought that, George has something against different colors of skin. So, of course, George is in a panic. Obviously, again, he's trying to get on better terms with Mr. Morgan, but yet he's off to a good start. So, he comes to this idea that he says, I'll introduce Mr. Morgan to some of my black friends. The thing is, though, is George doesn't have any. But, of course, as Jerry says also, George barely has any friends that are white also. So George then starts going on some journey where he's trying to, just become friends with someone who's black. He even goes as far as goes to the apartment with Joe, the guy who he basically went to his apartment to watch Breakfast with Tiffany's when he basically didn't want to read the book. He was a part of that book club. He, of course, ran into a few people on the street. And, of course, in the midst of when Jerry was in a panic later in the episode, Jerry called George because he wanted to try to get his whole someone to tell Bridget he was going to be late, which will explain why shortly. But then, of course, George was more focused on trying to find a friend who's black, and he asks for Jerry for information on the exterminator that worked on the fleas at Jerry's apartment, which was Carl. So, and I'm going to wrap up George's story here because this is pretty brief and sidelined. But so anyways, he calls Carl. Carl comes to the stadium. And George tells him to not show up, with his uniform or any equipment. And all Carl kept telling him was, I'm the exterminator. And George kept saying, just pretend we're old friends, basically. But then Carl kept coming back to saying, I'm the exterminator. I'm the exterminator. And then, of course, George thought he would just have this Mr. Morgan come by the office. That way he can meet Carl. Just have some way for George to show Mr. Morgan that he has nothing against different colors of skin. So Mr. Morgan was out eating. So they went to the restaurant, met Mr. Morgan there, and the three of them had had dinner together, which George said he would pay for it. And things were going fine until Mr. Morgan finds out that Carl really is an exterminator, and he's just posing as George's friend, and Mr. Morgan gets mad and walks out. But of course, George gets satisfaction when one of the waiters says, "Hey, Sugar Ray tell Sugar Ray that dinner's on the house," which George was like, triumphant because somebody else, because none of it, Jerry or Kramer, I know didn't think so because when they saw the photo, but someone else finally believed George when they thought that Mr. Morgan looked like Sugar Ray Leonard. There's actually also a deleted scene where George is working the ticket booth at the Yankee game, working the ticket booth and working the will call ticket booth, and Sugar Ray Leonard literally did come to pick up tickets at the ticket booth. Of course, George noticed after he walked away, and he called for Sugar Ray, but he didn't come back. But that's George's story. The others kind of tie into each other, so I'm going to just kind of keep going with the story. So anyways, Kramer goes with Jerry to the airport. After Jerry, of course, had lunch with George, he also stopped at the drugstore again where he ran to Mr. Pitt, but he didn't know. So Kramer went with him. Kramer, though, meanwhile, was chilling at the airport while he was waiting for Jerry to come back. While Kramer was there, he met Earl, who was a rich Texan, and Kramer used to have a bad gambling addiction. Earl, though, talks Kramer into betting on. Earl says how none of these ETAs for when planes arrive are never on time. He's betting. Then they start betting with each other how one's going to arrive quicker than the other, and whatnot. And then, of course, Jerry, takes off for Ithaca. But the problem Jerry was having is his new agent, Katie, is basically like a overbearing, overprotective mother. She acts like Jerry is some big celebrity who needs his hand held for every little decision made, which just drives Jerry insane. Has to tell Jerry ahead of time that they're going to do the procedures, on the plate, which Jerry knows. Yeah, go to the bathroom, Jerry, just like literally driving Jerry nuts about all this information that just is not important. And he doesn't really care whether if it's blue or if it's black. He doesn't care at all. But so he goes to do a show in Ithaca, and then before he goes on stage, Katie comes run over to him and says that I just want you to know, just don't get freaked out, that the pilot. Remember the plane we rode in on? Which, of course, why would Jerry not remember he flew in on a plane? But the pilot from that plane is going to be sitting in the audience watching the show, which Jerry was like, why would I care if the pilot was in the audience? It actually did happen for real to Jerry. where he was getting ready to do a show, and he gets like a breathless, panicked phone call from his agent saying that the pilot is in the audience. Now, Jerry didn't get freaked out, but in this episode, Jerry got freaked out. Because you look at the audience, you see this guy, and again, this pilot didn't have any lines in the episode, but he had that charm, that look to him. It's like, like he stood out. So I get, I love how, I get the, illustration as to how they made him someone that made Jerry uncomfortable. Even though he literally did nothing, it was just there. He made him uncomfortable. And of course, Katie then chews out the pilot, I guess, and the pilot kicked Jerry off the plane. So now Jerry has to find a way to get home, but also, he needs to also make sure somebody's at the Diplomat Club to tell Bridget he's going to be late and he's not standing her up. But again, he failed trying to call George. He tried to call Elaine. Elaine, meanwhile, so Mr. Pitt, of course, got that wrong medication thanks to Jerry's suggestion. I guess he collapsed and he was in bed and, wasn't doing too well. So, of course, Elaine came by, and then I guess his lawyer or whoever it was that was there. No, his lawyer was there because she was coming to go over his will, and she was the one who found Mr. Pitt collapsed. But then Mr. Pitt asked Elaine to get a pillow. So Elaine grabbed the pillow, but the way she had walked over to Mr. Pitt, the lawyer thought that Elaine was trying to smother Mr. Pitt with a pillow. Was she or not? I don't know. Because to be honest, you could believe she may have been, because she knew that he was in his will, and she knew that he was not well. And then also, when Jerry called Mr. Pitt's office, and the lawyer answered and said it was Jerry Seinfeld, Jerry was freaking out, trying to tell her to go down to the airport to tell Bridget. And of course, the way she was talking, again, the lawyer was becoming a little bit more suspicious of Jerry. Jerry, meanwhile, is still in Ithaca. The only two options for a flight to New York was a flight at 8 and a flight at 8:30, which Jerry's like, which I think I want. And Kay's like, oh, the 8, because the 8 is early, 8:30. But that's when he didn't realize that he meant 8 o'clock and 8:30 the next morning. And Jerry's like, no. He goes, I gotta go fly home tonight. Bridget's waiting for me. So they rented a car. And of course, she's asking what kind of car do you prefer we rent. And Jerry's like, I don't care. Just make a decision yourself. And she just goes, okay, big celebrity, and walks away. So they rent a car, yet Katie got lost, and Jerry fell asleep, and basically she drove into someone's backyard pool. And it was on the news, and then Mr. Pitt then was watching the news and saw Jerry, and she said that's the guy who gave me the medication. And then the lawyer, though, realized that Jerry Seinfeld called Elaine earlier. And with the suspicions with the pillow and the way Elaine was freaking out on Jerry as she was getting ready to leave, go to the airport to give Bridget the heads up. She basically told Mr. Pitt, I think she's trying to kill you. Which, of course, first off, Elaine went to the airport. Now before that, Kramer was still betting with Earl. And he was way in the hole. He was like $3,200 in the hole. So Kramer said, one more bet, double or nothing. He goes, okay, but I want to see some cash here. Kramer had no cash. So he called Newman, and he wanted Newman to bring some special bag that was owned by some special delivery man or some famous murder or something. I can't remember what the whole story was. So it was worth a lot of money. So Earl accepts the bag. And they're betting on Ithaca, Jerry's flight, and I forgot which other one they were betting on. Of course, because of Jerry, because the pilot not allowing Jerry to be on the plane, it caused a delay, which caused Earl to lose. So Kramer first won until Elaine, she comes in and says, and she starts telling Kramer what happened as Earl was getting ready to write out a check for Kramer. But since Earl found out that Jerry caused the delay delay on the plane, that Earl wasn't paying up because he claims he got hustled. To which, of course, Earl leaves, and then Bridget walks in, which I don't think anybody knew what Bridget looked like, so I don't know if Bridget got the message or not or what, but Elaine went back to Mr. Pitts. And, of course, he now thinks that Jerry tried to poison him, and he also thinks that Elaine tried to smother him with a pillow. So because of that, Mr. Pitt fired Elaine. After Elaine wanted to quit, but then, of course, didn't when Mr. Pitts said that he thought of her as a daughter and wanted her in his will, she gets fired in the end. So no more buying socks, no more doing petty little things. It's over with Elaine and Mr. Pitt. Meanwhile, of course, after all this hassle, Jerry finally gets back to the airport. Bridget was understanding, wasn't mad at him, and basically Jerry's bummed out because he missed their whole time together. But Bridget was like, well, my plane doesn't take off for another half hour, or wasn't bored. So they went to the Diplomats Club, and they started getting it on. Unfortunately, though, there was a plane starting to take off right outside the window, and of course Jerry notices the plane while they were, about to really get physical. And of course, who happens to be in the plane, staring him down? That stinking pilot. And again, Jerry freaks out. Oh, man. Again, who cares that the pilot's in the audience? But again, whatever this guy's name was who played the pilot, because he was uncredited. There was no name in there. He just had the look of, someone that just stood out that obviously would kind of freak you out a bit. Because the guy actually, believe it or not, was not an actor. He was played by a delivery man for Sparkletts who just happened to arrive at the office one day, and then when he walked in, they go, oh, that guy looks like a pilot. He had no speaking lines, but just his gestures and whatnot just made him perfect for the part. And believe it or not, whoever this guy's name was, he quit his job and went on to become an actor. Whatever his name was, I don't know, but it was something for sure. Of course, the lady who played Katie was Deborah Jo Rupp, who I also know her as a lady who played in Friends, Frank Jr.'s much more older wife that he has triplets with. That literally the time they see them, they start talking and they start making out like they're about to have sex in front of everyone again, basically. But yeah, other than that, we have, of course, Kramer's gambling addiction being brought up again. The bag. Newman tells, this is from IMDb, Newman tells Earl that he took over David Berkowitz's mail route, pronouncing the word, David Berkowitz, I think, was a person that he took his mail route for, but he was something to do with some type of like a murder or something like that. I think the story was that Newman said, I can't remember. But of course, Elaine, of course, is fired though by Mr. Pitt after less than a year, making it the shortest of the 3 jobs she had in the series. And eventually we do actually see Earl again, as in season 8, him and Kramer kind of go into a little bit of like a cigar business together in the English Patient episode. But, yeah. Why did that pilot freak Jerry out? The world will never know. But good episode. I do like the Diplomats Club episode as well. It's saying Jerry's half an hour again got interrupted by that stinking pilot, but that's the pilot. Next up, we got the Devils. We're the Devils. The Devils. As David Puddy makes another appearance yet again. And his enthusiasm towards his favorite hockey team causes a little bit of a rift there. And George also tries to take a big leap of faith. And Kramer, he gets into a little bit of a boom 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 match, somewhat, with a furry little creature. A harmless furry little creature. But who's that now? We'll talk about that next, in the next review. We have 2 more episodes left for season 6. So guys, What were your thoughts on the Diplomats Club? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video, subscribe for more content on my channel, and follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Till then, guys, I'm checking out. I will catch you all later. Have a great rest of your night. Peace out, everybody.